Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hey guys, welcome back to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast with Barbara Heidenreich. Guess what? We're going to take another deep dive into the constructional approach, or constructional aggression treatment, CAT, all that fun stuff. And we're going to get a little farther into this topic of negative reinforcement and especially counterconditioning this time. So I'm really excited to be talking to my special guests, Mary Hunter and Dr. Jesus Rosales-Ruiz, because we take a little different angle this time. Last time when we talked to Kelly Snyder, we really went into the origins of the procedure and some of the details about application. But this time we're going to get a little deeper into the behavior science. And we look at some really cool examples and some of the things from the science that I think you'll really find enlightening, and some things that you probably haven't thought about before, like exactly what does counterconditioning look like? I think we all maybe have a different definition. We also talk about some really cool experiments that have been done that are really enlightening, some that have been tested in really the experimental analysis of behavior, and some that were some projects that were thesis projects that produced some really interesting results. And we also talk about some things that we all have done in the field, some of the things that I've done with my own animals, and some of the things that I've been doing in the zoological community, and some of the things that Mary and Jesus have been doing. So some really interesting case studies that I think you will enjoy quite a bit. So this is just another great deep dive into the science and also into the practical application of these procedures. So this is really a little bit of something for everybody, to be quite honest. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. So let's not wait any longer. Let's just get right into this interview. And you're going to find some great resources at the end, so stick around for that. You can also visit the webpage to get links to how you can find out a whole lot more about this. Oh, and also some video clips. All right, guys, here we go. Let's get into it.
Hey, here we are. We're doing another podcast. Just like that. And I have special guests again, because it's no fun just listening to me. It's more fun to listen to my special guests. And this time I have Mary Hunter and I have Dr. Jesus Rosales-Ruiz. And we're going to talk behavior science, because I'm geeking out on behavior science these days. So welcome, Mary and Jesus. Fighting over who talks first.
Okay. No, it's our pleasure to be here, Barbara. Sorry, you got us by surprise. So I was waiting for Mary to answer first. No, but we are very excited to talk to you. We haven't seen you for, well, how long?
A year and a half?
Or
almost, yeah, I guess.
And ASAT or
at the Art and Science of Animal Training in February 2020, right before the pandemic started. So it's exciting to be here today and to get to talk about animal training and behavior analysis.
It's very cool. I remember that in that conference, ASAT, because you had an awesome presentation about CAT.
Oh, thank you.
I really like what you're doing on CAT and with the zoo. I think that, well, we'll talk maybe more about this, but I think that is a very useful tool for zoos in particular. I mean, the CAT is useful for everybody, but in zoos, I think that I mean, you just need to learn how to apply it, but I think that it's a very useful tool.
Well, I have to say, since that presentation, it might have been the first time I did that presentation about using that procedure in the zoological setting. And I actually have presented it quite a bit during the pandemic.
Very good.
Over Zoom and whatnot. And so I think it really has reached quite a few people, and I've had some more invitations to talk on that subject. And I think, we're really kind of seeing more people be more receptive to the idea, which I'm sure we're going to get into more in this podcast. But that whole conference, I have to say, the theme was negative reinforcement, wasn't it?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So why did you choose that theme?
That's, I think that was the, my mind is blown. I have to say, since that presentation about using that procedure in the zoological setting. And I think it really has reached quite a few people, and I've had some more invitations to talk on that subject. And I think, we're really kind of seeing more people be more receptive to the idea, which I'm sure we're going to get into more in this podcast. But that whole conference, I have to say, the theme was negative reinforcement, wasn't it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So why did you choose that theme? that's a really intense theme, I think.
Yeah, well, some people might say that it was, it was related to cat, but what happens is I have a very good friend, Phil Hanline, who is the world expert in negative reinforcement, and I always thought that he had a really nice story about negative reinforcement, and that, and also if you meet Phil, if you personally, you must think that he's the kindest person in the whole world. So for him, picturing doing these experiments and negative reinforcement with rats, and he is like, like cognitive dissonance. I say, whoa, what is this? So he retired. And so I thought, it'd be really good for him to give him a forum, for him to tell a story. But I told him, you need to come in and tell the story in plain English. He and I wrote a chapter in 2014 about aversive events. So I wrote the part on punishment, and he wrote the part on negative reinforcement, which is a very, very, actually, that's the most modern version of aversive events. And it's not because I was a co-author, but I think that it's a good article. So I wanted him to tell his story, and I particularly wanted the animal trainers to have access to him, because this is a very important concept for him, and he spent his whole life trying to understand it. So I say, it'd be really cool. And also, in addition, the conference, ASAT, that was the main purpose, like try to bring things or confront issues, not necessarily dictated by what is cool at the moment, or the professional needs of particular groups, or continuing education. It was more designed to make us think, So that's why we needed to confront these issues, which is sometimes very difficult to confront in the animal training community, because people get really emotional.
But to pick, for the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference, we try to pick themes or topics as well where we can have a keynote speaker or a behavior analyst present something that will be new to the animal training community and really get them thinking, but where as well we can have presentations where animal trainers are presenting things that are going to get the academics and behavior analysts thinking about things in new ways as well. So we thought negative reinforcement, a lot of the academic stuff, the animal trainers aren't as familiar with, especially a lot of that early research. But then as well, a lot of the stuff we're doing now, like constructional aggression treatment and things like that, the academics and behavior analysis community isn't necessarily familiar with, and it lets them see negative reinforcement in a different light and gets kind of the wheels turning of new research questions and new ideas for them as well. So we try to make it go both ways where everyone's thinking about new ideas.
Mm-hmm. And then you see, since now you're going to be studying or going to school in behavior analysis, and of course you're going to run to reading about negative reinforcement. One thing that probably behavior analysts will find fascinating about the practitioners or CAT uses negative reinforcement is that I don't think that in behavior analysis they have the notion of shaping with negative reinforcement. The shaping part is gone. And that's why it looks aversive, because it's more like an all or none. Like I'm gonna pressure you and then release you, which is the stream. So the stream would be what? Cesar Millan, like the dominance. When he puts, he has the dog by the neck and put it there. And so the aversive is there and it doesn't give up until the dog gives in, and then the aversive goes.
Or the classic lab example would be, you have a rat in the Skinner box, and most of these experiments were done in the 50s and 60s, and, they apply a shock, and the rat is, flinching and sweating and running around. And when he presses the lever, then the shock goes away. But there's no teaching process. There's no shaping process or approximations to teach the rat how to do this. There's a lot of suffering and frustration and anxiety, and then eventually the rat figures it out. But it may take a long time for the rat to figure it out, or the rat may not figure it out at all. But there's not an idea of teaching with negative reinforcement. Learning or teaching.
Yeah, that you see the idea is either all like all or none, and that. And but the same thing, like if we move like if we didn't have even though we have an idea of shaping with positive reinforcement, if you lump too much, that would be like the symmetrical argument. If you lump too much, you also can frustrate an animal and make him mad or leave the session or all it. If your criteria of reinforcement is too high and they have no way to do it, and you have this awesome trait that I really want, that can also produce frustration. So there again, the same thing will apply, that there is no shaping. It's not getting these successive approximations, not to get the animal so emotional, And you can get emotionality either with positive reinforcement or with an aversive stimulus. So that's one difference that you're gonna find in the literature of plant, and that's one thing that I'm trying to get more of my colleagues doing with children with aggression, or fearful children. The same thing, like approach to the point of to at some point that they are alerting. They say what is going on. It still is not a full blown aggression or fear response, and then start checking from that.
That's true. When you think about shaping, I don't know that I've read anywhere where shaping is considered anything but a positive reinforcement process.
Positive, yes. But here is the trick, and this is why it's so confusing. But still, so all shaping procedures should apply to reinforcement, either negative or punishment. The shaping applies to reinforcing, because what you need is, what creates your shaping is the differential reinforcement of the behavior.
Right.
Actually, all reinforcement procedures apply to positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. Like the shaping, but the notion is rare, and it needed because in the Skinner box, when they were doing in the 50s these experiments, they have like 40% of the rats, I think that is calculated, 40% of the rats didn't make it, didn't learn anything, because they have to also almost learn by accident that, when I press this lever, then I go,
You're talking about the experiments of shock.
The shock. Yeah, no, let's say, or avoidance of the negative reinforcement. Like the light comes on, a warning light, a shock is coming, and you, oh my God, and then suddenly by accident, then you discover the lever, then you're sunk.
But a lot of the rats weren't able to figure that out. Whereas,
there's one of the studies that I didn't think that it existed, but it actually existed, is talking about the shaping with negative reinforcement. And one of the books by Howard Rackling, he's a famous behavior analyst, and his books have been, I think that the title of the books are Learning and Behavior, and he has several versions on that. In there, he has, and it's the only example of shaping that I can see described with negative reinforcement that I can see described in the textbooks, and it was a French psychologist in the 30s. He couldn't give me Howard Rackling. Hey, I need that reference, even if it is in French. Because what he did is, he shaped a cockroach to approach the light. So, like, how? How can that be possible? How can you train an animal to approach an aversive? And because if you tune on the light, the cockroach, what it does,
freezes or it runs away,
but most likely if is in a little box there, he will freeze, and so he didn't do that, it tuned just like cat, it tuned the light a little bit on. No, it was not too bright, but just enough light there. And then when the cockroach approached the source of the light, it turned it off.
And so then he would do it again. He'd turn the light back on. The cockroach would approach a little bit. He'd turn the light off. But the light was still at a very dim level.
And then he was increasing. So what the cockroach was learning, and this is how you can, if you want to turn around cat, is the cockroach learned to turn off the light.
Wow.
Through his behavior. Yeah. But, it was, it was shaped. All what I have to do to get rid of you is just to walk towards you and you go, okay. So that's the only place that I can see that there is a shaping. But that's basically what cat is,
And maybe we should, since we keep talking about it, we haven't really, I did do a podcast with Kelly Snyder, one of your students, former students, but maybe we should go ahead and define what CAT is, since we keep talking about it.
Okay, yes. Well, CAT stands for the Constructional Aggression Treatment. And it is, it's hard to say. And it has, the way that I define it has three characteristics, It's constructional. It's not about eliminating aggression. It's about finding a behavior that gets the same critical reinforcers that aggression is getting, but in better ways.
So when we're doing CAT, we don't focus at all on this. I want to eliminate the barking. I want to eliminate the lunging. I want to eliminate the growling. Instead, we focus on what would the perfect dog be doing in this situation, and then it's how do we get the dog to be doing those things, dog or any other animal. But the focus is not on eliminating behavior, but on figuring out what would the perfect animal be doing, and how do we create those behaviors.
And along the way, you teach them to control their environment, but nicer ways. Instead of, they just look at you, or or you're reinforcing the ears back or front or whatever. But they are learning something. They are doing something actively to get away, So in that sense, I think that, to me, that when somebody, like, any animals, including humans, when you can control your aversives, when you can turn it off and all that, that's empowerment.
Or your positive reinforcers.
Or your positive reinforcement, that's empowerment too.
When you can control your reinforcers, that's empowering.
So it's negative or positive. So the other aspect is that it uses functional analysis. It deals with the critical reinforcer. It doesn't try to add another extra reinforcers to cover the behavior. To overcome the behavior, because it's purely functional analysis. And the third characteristic is that. Okay.
So I was just going to say briefly, one thing for animal trainers to be aware of or think of is that, we usually use CAT for dogs who display aggression, but we want to make sure that the aggression is maintained by negative reinforcement. That is, that the dog's engaging in the aggression in order to get the person or the other dog or the threat to go away. Because if the dog's not doing that, if the dog's engaging in the aggressive behaviors because it gets attention from the owner or because it gets something else, then CAT's not going to work. But why I wanted to mention that is I think there's almost become a tendency in the dog training community and, in the zoo community and all the animal training, all parts of the animal training community to assume that certain behaviors are maintained by certain reinforcers. And that's not necessarily the case. So,
that's a good point.
So sometimes we have to just, because of the conditions we're working under, sometimes we have to just, it may look like something and we may have to assume it and start doing CAT, but we have to be open to the possibility and keep in the back of our mind that there may be something else maintaining the behavior. Like this is not a CAT example, but this is one of my favorite examples. I had a little boxer mix in one of my group dog training classes at one point, and the dog was horrible about jumping on people. And, the current wisdom in the dog training community is that dogs jump because they want attention and they want to be petted and they want interaction from people. And after working with this dog for a couple weeks and working with the dog's owners, I realized that the dog loved her owners and loved petting and interaction from her owners, but she actually was a little bit afraid of new people, and she was jumping on people because if she was jumping on them, they couldn't pet her and touch her and interact with her. So the jumping was actually a way for her to get people, people would come over to her and try to pet her, and she would jump, and then the person would back away and leave her alone. So her owners were trying to get her to sit in order to interact with people, which wasn't working at all. It was actually producing more jumping, because the jump in this dog's case, the purpose of the jumping was not to solicit attention. It was to get people to leave her alone and go away. So whenever we're working with any sort of behavior that we're trying to replace with other behaviors, it's really important for us to just stop, step back and think, I think this behavior is maintained by this, but I actually need to watch what's happening in this situation and see, is what I think happening? Is that really what's happening for this individual?
So that's a good point, and I was just glossing over. So, but in that example, okay, if the dog is jumping, so the critical reinforcer is to move those away. So then, this might seem really out there, but then you should use moving away to train sitting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because that's what I want. Say, okay, I don't want to jump in. Okay, but I want, so sitting to strengthen me, they move away. Of course, this is not going to work because, that will invite, petting.
That would invite people to want to pet the dog more.
But that could be a good transitional pace before we start to switch over when they go, actually petting is not that bad. But no, you're right, so CAT is only going to work if the fear or the aggression is maintained by negative reinforcement. Like situations in which, for example, of aggression that I can think of, is a lot of it is household. I don't know why I said, but probably all of the cases that we deal with household aggression, it was maintained by the attention of the owners. When they separated, the separation was that contact and that extra attention was enough to maintain it. So in that sense, what we need to do is just to switch the attention from the aggressor to the victim. And okay, no, that doesn't work anymore. So I'm not gonna, because that moves further away. But you have to do some sort of analysis like that. And so if the behavior is maintained by positive reinforcement, you should use positive reinforcement too.
I know this is sort of a redundant question, but just to make sure it sinks in for people, can you reiterate? Can you address the question then why we don't use counterconditioning necessarily, or why we don't just give treats or give some appetitive in those moments? Because I've had that question. I'm sure you've had it as well. because
why don't we add like positive reinforcement
why don't we just start with that? I think that's typically, the question that I'm asked or the defense that I'm given as opposed to why we shouldn't use negative reinforcement is that it would be better to just start pairing good things with the presence of that person, and that it will change the emotional state of the animal with that aversive stimulus. And so I'm hoping you might address that.
So we have an aggressive dog who's growling at people. Why don't we just click and throw treats at him?
Why doesn't that change the emotional state? So, because that's usually what we're doing.
No, I know.
I know you already kind of answered it, but I'm going to throw it back at you.
Answer it maybe in a little different, in a different way, since I'm thinking about that. Because the problem is not physiological. The problem is behavioral. Like how to say, it's not like you are acting with this reflexive behavior and making it or transforming it or making it less independently of what's going on in there. It's not, they are treating it more like and that's a main distinction. They are treating it like if they were treating an isolated reflex, a trigger aggression, and the situation is more complex than that, like, so, but, I also, well, that's a big thing. I can answer those also and other things. Like I answered this question to you, actually. Actually, maybe that would be a good way to say is.
You mean the way you answered it to Barbara when you were talking to her about cats several years ago?
Several years ago when I told you are not doing counterconditioning. Yeah. And when I say is people say that they are, and this is the problem with negative reinforcement and the jargon and all of that. So I admit, it's very confusing. I think that sometimes, especially when I talk with my colleagues, I think that sometimes when they say counterconditioning or desensitization, they are referring more to an outcome rather than to a specific procedure.
Like I want the dog to be desensitized
or counterconditioned, or like they are trying rather than to a specific procedure. And when I think counterconditioning, I don't think outcomes, I think procedures. And so, in the counterconditioning procedures, it will be like that, just, like trigger, unconditional reinforcement, trigger, unconditional reinforcement, trigger, independently.
So, trigger, treat.
Trigger, treat, okay? And I say, okay, but that's not what they are doing. And most of the trainers that I see, they are very careful of not going, quote, over threshold. Yeah, so they are looking at the behavior. They are reinforcing systematically, when they call this threshold, which is also a very abstract concept. But anyway, they are looking at the behavior and they are deciding when if they throw a treat or not. They will never throw a treat to a dog that was about to bite them.
And they'd probably take a few steps back, so they're adjusting their criteria based on the dog's behavior. Whereas in a pure counterconditioning experiment or procedure, it would just be present the trigger, present the treat, present the trigger, present the treat. And that's the difference. That's one of the difference procedurally between classical conditioning and operant conditioning. In classical conditioning, it is a stimulus-stimulus relation, independently of what the dog is doing. It's just CS, US, CS, US, CS, US, CS, US, CS, no? And when you say CS, US, you mean
condition stimulus, or the unusual or to be conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. Trigger, food, those kind of things, independently of what the dog would do. Yeah? But so that's the procedure. So when I see or when I talk, like people like before with you, say, you're not doing that. You're shaping. You're more in the operant side than you don't think. And also, and this is, Kat made me think a lot about this. And the other thing is that in some, like desensitization or counterconditioning, like, let's say that desensitization, some, at the moment there's some person, they do the treat, some of them also move away. Yeah. So in there, the two are confounded, really.
So then it becomes fuzzy about what's actually affecting the behavior.
Is it affecting the behavior and all of that? And you can see actually a lot and with the animals, like with Jack, where you were doing something and they were giving treat and saying, no, it was me not touching the lip or something that was more important than the treat or something. So you need to look at, you need to look at the details and the emotional behavior, really. And so, at the end, and this is what we need to do in behavior analysis and animal training. Now we need to realize that at the end, all what we have is procedures, the specific ways that to do. Now we come and give name to those procedures. But names to those procedures. But then those procedures then they start varying, and then we end up not talking about the same thing. There are many ways of positively reinforce. And I say, I positively reinforce the child, and I never told you anything. I say, that's fine.
It's like if someone says,
I gave it cocaine or something like that. No.
I was gonna say it's like I'm sure, Barbara, you've met people, and people who are listening have met people who have said, I tried positive reinforcement with my animal and it didn't work. So sometimes it's convenient for us to have labels and have names, but so when someone says they use counterconditioning, or when they say they use negative reinforcement, or when they say they use desensitization, or when they say they use shaping with positive reinforcement, that's all well and good, but you have to ask, well, what are you really doing? And then beyond saying, what are you really doing, often you actually have to watch. Because one really important point I would make, that Jesus has showed video clips of this in some of his lectures on classical conditioning and things like that, is sometimes people say they're doing one procedure, but when you watch their actions and you watch the moment-to-moment decisions that they're making, you realize that they're not actually doing what they think they're doing. So when we're trying to evaluate procedures, and when we're trying to have discussions with other people about procedures, and especially about whether a procedure works or doesn't work, or whether we should use it or not use it, often in the training community, we're having these conversations like what you'd have at the bar, and then people get all in a huff and get mad at each other, and it may be that they're talking about two very different things. So it's really important to make sure that we're actually talking about the same things when we think we're talking about something.
So one thing that might work before, if I come and say, Barbara, I use negative reinforcement. And then you go and go, whoa, what is that? Or depending on
Jesus must be a horrible person.
Or what you imagine. That's the other thing. What people imagine negative reinforcement is, because I have had some trainers, actually some bird trainers who say, I never use negative reinforcement. But then you see them with their arms extended, walking, and all the birds moving away from there. I say, and what is that? That's negative reinforcement, my friend. I didn't see it like that. So, because they are thinking that negative reinforcement is something horrible or some electric shock or whatever. They don't think like just by them extending their arms and working towards the flock of birds, that's an example of negative reinforcement, or the birds moving to their cages. Yeah,
exactly. I agree 100%. And I love the discussion about what counterconditioning might look like to somebody, but what might actually be going on is really a shaping procedure that might be a combination of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement once you dice it apart and start dissecting everything. So I think that's really fascinating for people to start looking at their own animal training.
Yes, and everybody should do that. And this is, even Skinner will say that, look at the procedures. Don't pay attention how they call them. Because I'm sure you have. Once I was in Denmark, and people were talking about a concept that was called reverse luring, and I didn't know what reverse luring was there. But there's some audience that, oh no, that's horrible, reverse luring, no, blah. And they got
in a big fight.
In a big fight and all of that, until finally somebody says, can you describe what is reverse luring? And so they describe, I just put the treat in front of their face and they sit. Well, that doesn't seem as horrible because the other person thought that reverse luring was pushing the dog backwards with the treat in the mouth and pushing it backwards like that. Oh no, that would be bad, horrible. But you see, but the point is that we spend a lot of time there and we get emotional without really knowing what we were talking about. We were just, going there. So I think that is better in all the discussions that we have about principles. I use positive reinforcement or whatever, those kind of things, is we need to be very descriptive. Very descriptive. Let me give you an example of positive reinforcement. Say, okay, and all those things, like I can have a child, and I want him to read, And one, I would say, okay, I'll give you $1 per page that you read. Yeah? That's positive reinforcement. Okay? As a privilege, you have to work for TV time. I can give you more time, But for that, I have to deprive that of TV time.
So you can earn TV time by reading.
By reading, okay? That's positive reinforcement, okay? Or I can say, you know what, you read this time, and then after dinner, we all gonna sit in the living room and hear the story. You're gonna give us to tell the story. And because you want, and assuming that, talking to that is a reinforcing. So we say, okay, those three things are positive reinforcement. Which one do you think that is gonna maintain the most?
So we had,
or make the kid enjoy reading the most. So you have reading for money, reading for TV time, and reading
to tell a story.
To tell
the story. To get the opportunity to tell the story of
with
what
the family.
What they read.
Well,
to tell the family what they just read about it. And these children like telling stories, okay?
I have to decide which one's most reinforcing to the individual?
Or will maintain the most? What is going to last longer?
Oh.
Hmm?
I don't know.
I don't know. It's the last one, because it's more natural reinforcement. You can find more people. Maybe that child is on his way to be a reporter or whatever,
Yeah.
And they say the natural, but all of them are positive reinforcement.
Right.
But obviously, some of them are more desirable than others. Some people feel, and it's arbitrary because some people feel really comfortable by arranging just the money after the reading, which is fine. I have nothing against that. Yeah. But to me, I was, no, we need to think more further in the future,
Yeah.
What would be the approach, which is also very constructional, what would be the natural reinforcer?
For the natural reinforcer, so we would hope the natural reinforcer of reading itself would take over. So that we don't have to have contrived reinforcers of giving money and whatnot eventually, right?
Yes. Or you can set up also reading to solve a problem. and to program those positive reinforcers too. And that to me would be more valuable and more coherent or something like that. So, but it depends at the end of what you want.
Yeah. I think for me going to school, I'm hoping that, it's not about getting a degree. I hope that the learning itself is the reinforcing value, which is why you put in the work. It's not just for the grade that you get on the thing or, it's ultimately the learning, right? And what you get.
So the point is to be that constructional and to always build the behavior, because it is true, if you read to get knowledge, which is positive reinforcement, you need to design those settings. Because I would not want a lot of students, they read because they are afraid to failing.
Mm-hmm. Or they read to pass the test.
Or to pass the test next week. So that's avoidance, Yeah. Me, I say, no, that's not a good,
right.
I mean, same reading, they might have the same grade or something, but this one that is doing on the negative reinforcement purely is not gonna.
Right.
Yeah, it's not gonna learn as much, I don't think, or it's gonna forget. But I don't know.
The kid who's reading because they have a problem they want to solve versus the kid who's reading the chapter just to pass the test.
To pass the test. Right. So in that sense, we need to get away and we need to destroy all those negative reinforcement contingencies. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's a particular pyromotivation. There are that. And even in CAT, in CAT, we don't stay there, we don't stay in the negative. Ultimately is to get in it, to running towards something. Because,
Can I
let me finish. In the constructional approach, Gold Diamond has these two important questions. Are you running towards something, which is positive reinforcement, or are you running away from something, which is negative? So, and you have to say, okay, how can we turn these negative reinforcement contingencies into positive reinforcement contingencies? So at the zoo, yes, you might begin with negative reinforcement because that's the most important reinforcer there. But once that interaction allow for other interactions between you and the animals, then maybe now this is going to turn into a training situation maintained by food or scratches or attention or other things, which is ultimately that, because your animal at the end should be doing this to get your interaction and not to say, okay, I'm going to interact with her because if I interact, then she's going to go away. And that's good. And then once she goes away, I feel the relief. I'm sorry.
So, no, I was just going to explain that a little bit more. So Jesus likes to talk about CAT going through 3 phases. So, and this may help some people who are uncomfortable with the idea of using negative reinforcement in that we don't, the goal of CAT is not to stay in negative reinforcement. So, we start off with, when we have an animal that comes to us that we're about to start working with, the animal has unwanted behaviors, whether that's lunging, growling, cowering, whatnot, that are maintained by negative reinforcement. And then once we start doing CAT, what happens is we go through a phase where we're giving the animal distance or whatever the animal wants, contingent on good behaviors. And so we get into a phase where we have, good behaviors, relaxation, friendliness, calmness, but it's still maintained by negative reinforcement. But then once the animal starts being curious and approaching and offering other behaviors, like Jesus was just saying, we can switch over to the phase where we now have good behaviors maintained by positive reinforcement. So in the end, we get completely out of that negative reinforcement contingency. And now that the animal has all these good behaviors that are maintained by positive reinforcement, you have mutual relationship that both the animal and the trainer enjoys, that can maintain.
We're going to take a little break to give you your first secret word, and the secret word is cockroach, C-O-C-K-R-O-A-C-H. Secret words are important to remember and submit to show you have listened to this podcast for your professional development. Listening to Animal Training Fundamentals podcasts are important for earning certain badges if you're a member of animaltrainingfundamentals.com. All right, back to the program.
So one thing I wanted to ask about, because I think this is a really interesting component of the constructional approach and negative reinforcement in general, is the aversive stimulus. Because I think when people think about negative reinforcement, there's a lot of focus on the aversive stimulus. And I think when people think of that sort of generic definition, the quality of that aversive stimulus is sort of given this immediate, like you were talking about the scientific studies that it's shock, but one of the things about, especially with the constructional approach, is that we create conditions in which that aversive stimulus is just barely even noticeable. And then I think one of the things that in my experience applying it is that what we see is basically sort of the characteristics of it sort of change. We create a situation in which it changes from an aversive stimulus to an appetitive, in my opinion, when we do the whole procedure. And I don't know, what's your take on all that, or how would you describe that?
Well, that's still continues to be a mystery. We call it the switchover. What I think that at the beginning, when you have an aversive, in the presence of aversive stimulation, your repertoire contracts. You have less choices. Like, okay, I'm here, alerting what is going to go. So there is not so much variability or approximations or curiosity. So all of that gets inhibited, because you got it a little bit of freezing and say, what is going on, and aggression has all these things like, because first is the alert, or even in and then you start escalating, and then you go, are you talking to me? Are you talking to me? Or what that? Like the movie. And then if that doesn't, then you start escalating. But if not, then you go. So what I think that once that you start doing that, and when you're moving, I say, I just turn and see Barbara and she goes away. So I think that they just start, this is anthropomorphic, but I don't know, but I was putting myself say, I can control Barbara just by looking at her. If I look at her, she goes away. So, but actually it's not anthropomorphic, because shaping is that way. It's a two-way, there is this famous cartoon that it says, there are two rats in the Skinner box. They say, hey, I have this guy very well conditioned. Every time that I press the lever, he gives me a pellet. So that is that. Okay. So when you go to that point and they realize, I just have to do that, then your repertoire starts expanding. Then you are not just in the defensive mode. Like, okay, now you're more relaxed. Okay. So now that invites other sets of behaviors that we can call exploration. Like say, okay. And then, maybe Barbara is not that bad, this kind of thing. So once that you get at that point, then that's when you start introducing positive reinforcers. But now you have the exploration, the sniffs, the orientations, you have all those bits. At the beginning, you still go away, because you want to make sure that, those are not, that moving away is still effective for them. But then, in the zoo, of course, you have to work in protective contact and all of that. So, and then maybe that would be a point of throwing a treat or something, yeah? And then that whole situation changes. But the effect of that treat now that trick can have the effect because the animal is truly relaxed. It's not a defensive, and the repertoire is more of a seeking and exploring. He's again into this seeking mode, and that's what I think. And that's how I like it. I tell my students what I want is like, I want to do cat and say, oh, Barbara is not that bad. Okay, no, Barbara is not that bad. And say, oh, Barbara is not bad. I don't have to worry about it. And then suddenly you throw a trick. Oh, and she has cookies too. Awesome. I want that. And that's why I separate the distancing from the positive reinforcement. Because the other way, it would be, I'm approaching you and you're offering me a cookie, and I go, yes, I want that cookie, but I don't know about Barbara. And then I extend my neck, and I take it and I move away. Okay? I don't want to reinforce or capture that inadvertently. I don't want that ambivalence in the thing. I want each contingency do its job at the appropriate time. Because I think that positive reinforcement will have way better effects once that you take care of the negative reinforcement contingency, rather than trying to combine them or lure the animal. I think that that's why, and this is my opinion, when you see this counterconditioning and this desensitization, you see a lot of animals not out there, just tolerant. Like ambivalent, like conflicted a little. Yes, they are not aggressive, like they are not a huge fire, but the flame is still there, like, should I go? And that's why then you have this little flame and then something happens and then just go, and explodes. That doesn't happen that much with cat because we are teaching you repertoires, ways to handle the environment. We are not and by changing the contingency, that's how we're going to change the motion, really. And we're not teaching you just to be just calmer. We're giving you behavior to be very effective in your environment. And if you can control the environment, that gives you peace.
Yeah, and when you describe that body language, I always remember that conversation, and the more I've thought about it over the years, the more I think that image to me is really coercive compared to using the constructional approach. When I think of an animal that's showing me body language that it's uncomfortable, but it's having to kind of fight through that fear response or aggressive response to take that appetitive, that food item or whatever, that to me is an animal that is kind of in a situation that is coercive compared to the constructional approach when I think of that stimulus picture. So, when we get into those discussions where people are saying, well, negative reinforcement's coercive, I kind of think, you know what? I think the opposite. Actually get a little bit more coercive than what we're talking about here.
Yes. Have you heard Joe Lane tell how he can tell you how can you make positive reinforcement very coercive too?
Yeah. So, and the short summary of Joe's talk about that is that, and maybe you talked about this in the podcast that you did with him last year. But it depends on the number of alternatives the animal has. If the animal really wants the food and is really hungry and the only way the animal can get the food is by approaching the scary thing, yes, the animal is going to approach the scary thing, but, that doesn't mean that it likes the scary thing,
that is fine.
Or that it's fine with the scary thing, or that if it had choices, it would still approach the scary thing, So, we can manipulate a lot of behavior using food and by constraining the alternatives and options that the animal has available. And even if the animal approaches and eats the food, that doesn't necessarily mean that the animal feels okay with the situation or feels safe or likes the scary thing.
Mm-hmm. One thing, a long time ago, and we haven't published this, we did a very interesting study because, in the early days of CAT, it was very criticized. So I was interested to see if it really, let's say, desensitization or the counterconditioning will bring dog alive and not being so cautious on that. So the master thesis, if people, since it's Beatrice Kunkel, or is that her name? No. Becky Kunkel, yeah. Anyway, so she had this baseline. So she had this vacuum cleaner that the dog was terrified of the vacuum cleaner and, just the side, those kind of things. And then we have a stool. And we reinforced there for variability, like the 101 things kind of thing there. And no, we say we reinforce it with the stool, okay, because he will not approach it, and just for us to figure out, the variability of the response, and we were treating and say more, what else, just to get the variability going. Then we did desensitization with and counterconditioning with vacuum. We basically sort of lured him to the vacuum, we call it. And then
anyway, you followed the type of desensitization procedure that many animal trainers were using at that time. And that many animal trainers would have said was acceptable.
Yes, acceptable. So I got the dog and touched the vacuum cleaner. Okay. So, okay, awesome. Let's begin our variability training. Stereotypic responses. And I say, wow, but this will pass the disease. I mean, the dog wasn't happy or over, but you will get like, is there tolerant by the vacuum cleaner, doesn't mind it, he's here with the owner, but we couldn't get variability. It was like
interacting,
but it's the same thing, Barbara, that was talking about. It's like if you're in front of a your repertoire sort of like contracts, and you're in the defensive mode.
If I remember this correctly, Jesus can tell me if this is wrong. She eventually got to where the dog looked fairly normal around the vacuum cleaner, but you all did some probes at the end where just testing under various situations. And if one of them, I think, was they had either the stool, which was the neutral item, or the vacuum cleaner in the middle of the room. And she would call the dog to come to her across the room. And even though they had gotten to the point where, she could use the vacuum and the dog looked pretty happy or pretty normal, so to speak, around the vacuum cleaner, when they did some of these probes, she'd call the dog across the room, and when the stool was in the middle of the room, the dog would come all happy and wiggly and waggly at a pretty fast pace. And when she called the dog across the room, when the vacuum was in the middle of the room, the dog didn't even have to interact with it. The dog was just coming across the room to her. The dog was slower, hesitant, would go in an arc to go around the vacuum. So it was interesting because when she got to the point where the dog was pretty, what you would say, almost okay or almost normal around the vacuum. But if you pushed or probed or prodded in certain ways, you could tell that the dog still was not comfortable with the vacuum. And who knows, some trainers would say, oh, you didn't do counter conditioning right. Oh, you needed another 2,000 pairings of click and treat and whatnot. But so I think the point here with that thesis, though, is if we want a procedure that's fast, that's fairly efficient, that, an average trainer or pet owner can apply, what a lot of trainers will tell you is that counter conditioning and desensitization takes a long time. You have to click and treat and do all these trials and repetitions, and it may take, months or years to get your dog comfortable with people or with other dogs or whatnot. And so the point of trying to develop CAT has been to develop a procedure that we can use that gets these dogs to this point of switchover in, often just an hour or two or less even, so, in a fairly efficient, amount of time.
If the environment is right,
yeah.
Yes. But that's the other thing. But part of the reason, and we learn also this in cat, the beginning in cat, when we were shaping this behavior and basically later on we came up with the idea, we are expanding the repertoire. We're opening up the repertoire because at the beginning we were so happy and it was so easy because, we will approach and the first behavior that we will invariably shape was turning away, the head turning. So we will capture that.
These were with dogs that were aggressive towards people.
Dogs were yes.
So a volunteer is walking up to a certain distance before the dog starts aggressing, and then the dog turns his head away, and you walk away.
Yes. So, and this was at the beginning when Kelly and I we were developing the procedure. So we were so happy, awesome. So let's capture this turning away. But the problem was when we got so close, and so the dog was, okay, this turning away is not working anymore because these people are too close. Then what other behavior they have to do with aggression? So they will easily go back to aggression, easily will revert back to aggression. And that was one scenario, and I tell you what we did. So when we realized, no, what we need to do is to build many behaviors, give many alternatives to this dog, so to push resurgence. So we were talking resurgence. We need to push aggression back to the last resort, so we can reinforce head turning, hair lowering, laying down, like several behaviors that we were purposely, like 4 or 5 behaviors, so purposely were reinforcing one. That was it. Okay, now let's switch to, this doesn't work. Now another, okay, to get in this moment in order for us to put aggression the farthest away. So here, the dog the dog is learning several ways that he can deal with the same situation, or there are several behaviors that affect that. So in that, when we will cross the limit, and then we were, say, over, like this, when we put him on extinction of that behavior, then we will see, we're going too far. If this dog is going back to, no, we basically, we're too close. Let's go back down into that because this dog shouldn't be going down so fast, these behaviors, Anyway, so that's also, say, important that, these dogs are specifically, or the animals are learning some part of the body or just looking at you or approaching you or something. It has an effect on the environment. The counterconditioning, which we say that, maybe it's not counterconditioning, it's something else, is since they don't have a specific behavior, usually they get statue dogs. If just waiting here, which we got too, because at the beginning we were, and the horses taught us this because they are really good at not doing anything and being statues there. And actually also the cats too, the feral cats. It's because at the beginning we were still influenced by this emotional thing and they say, okay, we'll just need to go and touch them. So our goal is to touch them, like in there, like, because if we could touch them, we say, they are fine with us. So what these animals learn is to say, okay, I just need to not move. These guys come and touch and they go away, But basically we were teaching them nothing.
But to be statues.
Interesting.
And what we need to be teaching, we need to teach it interaction. So that's when we change the rules and say, you know what? We cannot come closer to this. From here, so we can only come this far, and from this far, then we're going to shape interaction. Otherwise,
so it depends on the species, but
yes.
Like with the dogs, now we usually don't get closer than about 6 feet. And after that, the dog has to choose to approach. And approach with friendly body language, But, same thing with the horses. We usually don't get closer than, 1 or 2 horse lengths from the horse. And the horse has to choose to approach the rest of the way. So that, and the only way to get to that point is if, like Jesus was saying, you're shaping variability and movement and reinforcing a variety of different behaviors. And what I was going to say a second ago as well, when you were talking about the statues with both counterconditioning and with CAT, is like what you reinforce is what you get. And so a lot of times when people are doing counterconditioning or using, just saying they're using positive reinforcement, they say they're changing the emotional association. So they're just focused on giving treats and they're not looking at what the animal is doing. But anytime you're giving food, there's also operant conditioning. There's always operant conditioning going on. So whatever the animal's doing or has been doing when you give the food, that's going to end up getting reinforced. So it's really important, no matter what you're doing, to pay attention to what the animal is doing before you give reinforcement and while you're giving reinforcement, because those are the behaviors that are going to get repeated. And if the animal's just standing there staring at you, then that's what the animal's going to keep doing.
Good point. And, and to kind of take this in a little bit of a tangent, one of the things that I remember discussing with you at one of the conferences was about shaping a specific behavior, although in these examples we're talking about variability. But one of the things I did do since the conference with my parrots is I did actually use negative reinforcement and the constructional approach, but more about with fear responses to shape targeting. And then I used it with a combination of positive reinforcement, and to shape nail trimming on one of my parrots. So one parrot was afraid of, I purposely picked objects that I thought my parrot would be afraid to target to.
Yes.
And I had a parrot that was afraid of, some different nail clippers that I hadn't used before. And so I purposely used those as ways to show that you could apply this, with my parrots, because I wanted to do a course on this specifically targeted towards parrots for
very good. Yeah, I would love to see the video.
Yeah, tell us more about what you did with the target.
Yeah, so with the target, so my macaw, who's actually back here in the corner here, you can kind of see her. So with her, I chose like giant targets that I would use with big animals that I knew she would be like, oh, I ain't going near that. And basically, so I did a little baseline. I kind of presented it to her and she went, no, thank you, and backed away. So I wanted to show that, this is an aversive stimulus to her. And then basically, any time that she was moving in any direction that might be slightly towards it, I just moved it away.
Right, yes.
Yeah. And so it was, and even if it wasn't intentional, so it might be that she was, just moving her head, moving a body part, anything. She wasn't necessarily orienting towards it. She wasn't trying to orient towards it, but it was just that any movements that were, a head turn or a step in any direction, she wasn't trying to get to it, but I would move it away. And I did enough of that. And we were on a tabletop, so, she could absolutely get far enough away. An important part of it, as you guys know, the animal needs to have the space to go away. You're not pushing into them or anything like that.
So that's negative reinforcement too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And,
a way out that's the plain English definition of negative reinforcement, a way out.
Yeah. Definitely. And then there came a point when she, you could tell she figured it out that, and that at some point she literally just reached for it. And when she reached for it, I switched to positive reinforcement, but I also pulled it away too. So she reached for it. I offered her a food item, but I also removed the item. So it was that combination of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And I kept doing that. But it was still a combination. So like there would be times when, she would still be moving around and I might just remove it. But anytime there was an intentional reach for it, I also delivered a food item, and then it turned into many intentional reaches. And I thought it was far better than that typical situation you see where people are luring an animal over to a target to get it to engage with it. And then eventually they touch it, and then, and then you're getting targeting. So instead of luring her over to touch a scary object, I used a combination of negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement to get it going. And then with the nail clippers, I did a thing where the parrot was hanging on the mesh, and I did more of a bringing it up and lowering it, bringing it up and lowering it, bringing it up and lowering it. And if the animal moved away, that was me having brought it up too close. It was more of a
yes, that was much.
Yeah. So
that's very cool.
Yeah. So so I just trying to show that you can do it with. And then eventually I got to the point where I was, touching his nail, and if it stayed, then I would remove it. And then it was, doing more movement with it. And if he stayed, then I would remove it. And then I could start combining it with positive reinforcement.
Yeah, this is just a short anecdote, but I was going to say, often with the horses, the first behavior people teach is targeting. But you do encounter some horses that are afraid of the target. And what people often do is just present the target close to the animal and try to reinforce with clicks and treats when the animal's orienting towards it or moving towards it. Or, if you get a little bit of an approximation of moving towards it, click treat. A little bit of approximation of moving towards it, click treat. And, that can work, but it's often slow, and you often still see this negative body language that indicates the animal's still skeptical or concerned about the target. So, if you can start instead by, I love the way you described that, just present the target, the animal orients to it a little bit, take it away. Present it, animal orients to it, take it away. And I'm sure you were pretty fast able to get to the point where she was more curious about it and approaching it.
Super fast. I can show you guys. Actually, I'll put the video on the page where this podcast is.
Awesome.
That'll be pretty good.
Others can see it as well, because it was quite fast. And then actually she generalized it to other objects really quickly. So I did it with like 2 or 3 other objects that were weird and new to her. And I went through the same process of, I'm going to present it, remove it. And so we had a few reps of that, but then she kind of very quickly went to, I'm probably supposed to orient towards this.
Orient and all of that. But you see, and we have been talking, Mary's doing a project now with fly spray, and I have another student doing it with dewormer, and one of the things that we're saying, constantly talking about is that, you get these animals and you present novel things, and of course they are going to react. And if you push them more and more and more, that's when it gets like aversive. But we don't know if it really was the ball or the way that you introduce the ball. So when we catch, you train them to do something. Oh, now I know what to do, and they start doing it. So that makes for a more confident animal that one like, okay, this is novel here. I don't know what to do. And then if you push it a little bit, then you start yourself producing more anxiety or fear or aggression or things like that. So
all I was going to say is, both in the traditional training world and in the positive training world, a lot of these things we just assume that they're aversive, whether it's fly spray or certain types of objects or whatnot, or dewormer. And if we're starting out with that assumption that this is aversive, my animal's not going to like it, it changes our behavior. Often we're tense, we're uptight, we're trying to creep in. The animal goes, why is my trainer acting so weird? And then the animal starts, feeling,
And they say, no, sweetie, come, it's going to be nice.
So, I think sometimes, I was actually going to make this point much earlier when we were talking about aversive stimuli, but I think we sometimes do ourselves a disservice by just assuming things are going to be aversive and by assuming that stimuli have properties. Like electric shock is always aversive. Fly spray is always aversive. Dewormer medication is always aversive. Nail clippers are always aversive. And, yes, for a lot of animals, especially depending on how they've been introduced, these things, they can often be things that our animals react to or want to avoid. But I think by trying to put inherent properties in these items, it does us a disservice.
Yeah, and the same thing with reinforcers,
Yeah, we look at these things as we look at food as a reinforcer, or we look at fly spray as an aversive stimulus instead of thinking, what's reinforcing about food? It's that my animal eats it. What may be aversive about fly spray? It's not the fly spray itself. Maybe it's the sound. Maybe it's the smell. Maybe it's feeling it being sprayed.
Maybe me coming, do something to you or something,
The trainer creeping in a certain way. So, I guess the point is, we have to look at the whole interaction and not make judgments about things. And because as well, if we're assuming that this thing is always reinforcing or this thing is always aversive, then we limit ourselves because, certain things are not always reinforcing and we have to keep that in mind. And then certain things that are aversive, we can change that. And if we start with the assumption that this can't be changed, we're going to approach training differently than if we start with the assumption that, well, this may be aversive right now, but I can change it so that my animal, either feels neutral towards it or even finds it as something reinforcing later on.
Time for your second secret word. And the secret word is constructional. 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 All right, let's get back to the program.
Okay. But I have a great story. So you may recall at the Art and Science of Animal Training, I shared I shared many examples of using the constructional approach. And one of them was with a herd of hemsbok, which is some antelope. And these were wild-caught antelope, and they were really far away, and we only did one session with them, and I was really pleased that we were even able to get them to approach a little bit. But I spoke to the people that work with those animals, and I now hear that they're actually all the way inside the stalls and the stables with people next to them. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I was very pleased to hear that. So that's huge for those.
That's good news. Yes.
Yeah.
And in situations like that, is that, like given that situation, how were they even just thinking, okay, how are you going to engineer the positive reinforcement? You could, but it will take a lot. In that sense, it's easier, especially if they are responding that far away from you, then that will be that. CAT is just very practical to do.
Yeah. And I think especially as you mentioned, for the zoo community, there's just so many situations in which it's really relevant and, it's really going to have a huge impact. And as you were discussing about some of these nuances of practical application, there is a lot for our community to learn and practice. And there's things to think about with, like I was saying, with herds and flocks and individual species specific behavior that people will need to learn and apply. So we've got some growth to do, but it's exciting. I'm really excited about this tool for our industry and how it's going to make such an impact.
Me too, because, people need to get creative because the concept is there, but like Murray Sidman says with respect to positive reinforcement here, the concept, the positive reinforcement and also negative reinforcement is very simple. But the problem is how to engineer it. Like, how are you going to bring positive reinforcement to the zoo or to the school or to that, in order for you to create the behavior change. So in that way, the keepers and you guys, you have to be very creative because, you are presenting with many situations and you have to be clever enough. Okay, how can I, be and have a consistent procedure here, like the negative? How can I go away easily? How can I still keep my distance? So there is a lot of all those kinds of things that need to be solved. But as you say, the more that people do this, the more tools and ways we're going to have to help these animals, and especially with shares. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I've had you here for a long time, but, and I know we could keep talking forever about this, but there are some more opportunities for people to learn from you both, correct? Coming up here in the future. And
oh, yes, that's true.
So maybe we should share those. So, maybe we should start with Art and Science. When is the next Art and Science of Animal Training conference?
Right. So we would love if anybody who wants to could join us for our next Art and Science of Animal Training conference. And it will be February 19th through 20th, 2022 in Hurst, Texas. And so Hurst, Texas is right near, it's between Dallas and Fort Worth. It's right near the Dallas airport. So it's really easy to get to if you want to fly in, or if you're more local, you can drive in. And I would say Art and Science of Animal Training brings together animal trainers and behavior analysts. But out of all the conferences I go to, it's really one that brings together zoo people, horse people, dog people, bird people. So it's really fun getting to interact with trainers who work with all sorts of different species. So we'd love it for people to join us there.
Yeah, and there is something for everybody. If you are a total beginner or if you are a really expert, so that's the nice thing that we can interact and you can interact at all those levels. So
and you can stay up until 2:00 in the morning talking with Barbara and with Jesus and with me. So it's always a lot of fun. But if people want something coming up much sooner, we also were going to mention I think they're saying CALWAT is how they're pronouncing it, the Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training Conference, which will be coming up in mid-July. And it's an online virtual conference that's organized by two of Jesus's former students, Sean Will and Masa Nishimuta. And so there's Dr. Joe Lang's going to be talking. Jesus will be presenting about CAT. There's going to be some presentations as well about the constructional approach and using that with positive reinforcement to solve a variety of problems. So that should be really fun as well.
And then you also have your site, Behavior Explorer, correct?
Yes. So if people want to find us online, Behavior Explorer is a good place to connect with me, and you can get in touch with Jesus through there as well. And we have the Portal manual, which is available from Behavior Explorer, which is, if you've never played Portal before, it's a shaping game that's played between people, but it's a great way to learn more about animal training and to improve your shaping skills and your teaching skills. And we plan to have more offerings and opportunities through Behavior Explorer in the future as well.
Science camp.
And science, yeah. Well, but that's not fair because science camp is full.
Is it? Okay. Then.
No,
so cut that out.
Maybe there'll be more in the future, right?
Yes, yes. So Jesus and I periodically do a science camp program with Alexandra Kurland, and we do have one coming up in September, but it is full already. But hopefully there will be more science camps coming up in 2022.
So they should probably just sign up on your website so they can be on your mailing list is what I'm thinking, huh?
Yes, that sounds like a perfect idea.
There you go. And you can get notified for the next one so you don't miss out. And I encourage people to also do that for the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference because past experience has shown that conference sells out very quickly. And my guess is after last year you get to do it, it's going to sell out fast this coming season.
Yeah. So that's artandscienceofanimaltraining.org.
And everybody's going to be deprived, so,
Yep.
Are we going away from our houses, or are we running towards an awesome conference?
I think we're running towards an awesome conference.
Okay, very good.
It is my favorite one. I always
me too.
My favorite one. So it stretches my brain, I definitely come away from that with like, oh my gosh, all these things I need to think about now. So it's a very inspiring conference. You will enjoy it. So, and just like we enjoyed talking to Mary Hunter and Jesus Rosales-Ruiz, thank you so much for doing this, guys.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Barbara. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I'll have to do it again because I could keep talking and talking and talking. So, and learn.
Definitely.
All right, guys. It's a good one. All right. Thank you so much. And I will look forward to seeing you in February.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay. Good luck and good to see you. And I'm really happy with all these things that you're doing with Kat, and please send videos. Okay.
Okay. We have to spread the word. Woohoo.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, it was so hard to stop talking. I had so many more questions I wanted to ask, but we were already like an hour and a half into it. So I'll tell you, we're just going to have to do another podcast interview with those two. And honestly, I will, like I said, you really want to come to the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference if you can. Another great opportunity to discuss these kinds of topics in more detail. And there's lots of other great minds there that are happy to dive deep into these kinds of conversations. You don't want to miss out on that. I think one of my favorite things that we discussed in this particular podcast is these misconceptions about counterconditioning. Because I think for us as animal trainers, that's a complex topic that maybe we don't have a lot of clarity on. So that would be a really fun one for us to get into even more. So anyway, food for thought, right? That's the whole point of these conversations. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really look forward to having you spend some more time with me next time. All right, that's it for this episode. We'll look forward to spending some more time with you talking training down the road. Until next time. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.